If you've ever held back from saying what needed to be said because you are worried about being labeled as too difficult or too harsh or too critical, you're not alone. I'm Larisa Harrington, leadership and well-being coach, and today I want to talk about how you can be more direct and candid without getting a reputation of being too harsh or unapproachable or negative. Because let's be real, clarity is kind and avoidance is not. And there's a way to share your truth with courage and compassion. And that's what we're going to chat about today. So, whether you are a team lead or an executive or an entrepreneur, your ability to communicate clearly and directly is one of the most important leadership skills you'll ever develop. But many of us have been conditioned to soften our voices, or we've experienced real backlash for being too direct. So we stay quiet, or we sugarcoat, or we hold it in for so long that we explode. And that leads to things like misunderstandings, resentment, a reputation for being passive aggressive or unclear, or the opposite, a label that we didn't learn, like being difficult or too intense. But here's what I want you to remember. You can speak your truth and still be kind. You can hold boundaries and maintain connection, and you can be clear without being cruel. So before you open your mouth, pause and get clear. Tip number one, why am I saying this? Am I speaking with someone to support their growth? Am I trying to offer clarity or feedback? Am I trying to protect my boundaries? Or am I trying to prove a point? Am I trying to vent? Am I trying to get the last word? Tip number one, be clear on your intention. So ask yourself, why do I want to say this thing that I want to say? And when your intention is truly grounded in service, care, and clarity, then you're far more likely to be received well. But if it's coming from reactivity or ego or frustration, it's going to land differently, no matter how nice the words are. So, tip number one is take a breath, be clear on why you're saying what you're saying, and be honest with yourself. Tip number two, once you've made that decision that, yes, this is something that needs to be communicated, regulate before you communicate. So sometimes when we are getting ready to have a maybe uncomfortable or difficult conversation, we might be a little bit activated. We might be a little on edge. And so regulate before you communicate. Regulate your own nervous system with things like deep breaths or maybe taking a walk or doing something to help ground you so that when you go into that conversation, you can deliver the message in the way that you'd like to deliver it. Sometimes when we are activated or we're in fight or flight, or there's a lot of uncomfortable or negative emotion surfacing during our conversations, we might not be able to communicate in the way that we'd like, or we might say or do things that we regret or that are not helping the conversation. And so before you speak, before you set the meeting, before you have this conversation, check in with yourself and make sure that you are in the right state, that you're showing up with the right energy before you go into this conversation. So checking in, am I calm? Am I connected? Or am I speaking from a place of fight or flight? Sometimes when we have something that we'd like to be said, we'd like to share something that we know needs to be said, and it is in the moment. Maybe we are actually in the midst of having a conversation with someone and we notice that we're getting activated or we're showing up in a way that we don't like. It can be helpful to take a step back, but also to communicate that with the other person and actually set a time frame to say, hey, I'm going to take 5 minutes, or I'm going to take 10 minutes, or I'm going to take 30 minutes. But make sure you come back to the conversation. So tip number one, right? Make sure you're clear on your intention. Tip number two, regulate before you communicate. And also check in during the conversation, if necessary, to see if you also need to take a deep breath, or if you need a few moments to come back to being in that clear and calm state when you're communicating. Because when our nervous system is regulated, our message becomes clearer and it'll be easier for us to communicate the things that we want to communicate. And we'll have more confidence with our message. It can also help other people be more open and receptive and less defensive when we are trying to communicate with them. All right. Tip number 3, use clear, compassionate language. So, a few practical tips when we're communicating is starting with I language. So, if we are giving someone feedback on something that they're doing, we're using I statements. Instead of saying something like, you always do this or you never do this, you can start it with like, I feel this way, or this is how I am receiving this thing that is happening. So notice the difference when we say you are doing this versus I, right? Like I feel out of the loop when decisions are made without me is very different than you never include me in any decisions. So think about how we can start with I statements. And then number 2, being specific and not vague. And so again, using things like always and never are not really helpful in being clear with what we are trying to communicate. So giving specific examples, sharing what we've observed, how it has impacted our team or our bottom line or the relationship, whatever it is. And then also being clear about what we'd like to happen next. Number 3, leave space for dialogue. When we are giving feedback, this is not us just talking at someone. Giving people feedback and then also leaving that space for dialogue to be able to open it up for real conversation, getting feedback from that other person, making sure that what we are trying to communicate is the same thing that they are receiving on their end. And then number 4 is using a neutral and grounded tone. So it's not just what we say, it's how we say it. So being mindful of our own self, right? Mindful meaning that we are being curious, non judgmental with ourselves and others. So being mindful of how we are communicating to make sure that our tone stays grounded, that we're not getting super activated and maybe sometimes being a little bit too intense in the way that we're communicating it to where the person again is not as receptive or they can have more defensiveness so they're not even listening to us anymore. So if we notice that we are getting a little bit too activated in the conversation, again, take a couple of deep breaths. Maybe have set a time to come back to the conversation if it's something that we're noticing we're not able to calm down in that moment. So I'm not saying that we can't have intense emotions around things, but we also have to be aware of how that's going to be received from the other person when we get so activated by something or when we raise our voice or when we start attacking someone else. The message can often get lost because we can shift someone else into feeling like they're being attacked and then they're in fight or flight as well. Right? So, bottom line, emotions are okay. It is okay for us to feel uncomfortable emotions, but we also have to check ourselves to notice how we might be showing up and how we might be received by other people when we are trying to communicate while we're in that activated state. And then tip number 4. Tip number 4 is around follow up and maybe repairing the relationship if needed. So even when our intentions are good, even when we have solid delivery, even when we are an expert communicator, sometimes the words that we're sharing might land hard. And so that's part of leadership, it's part of communication. And one of the tips is around the follow-up and that we don't just end it, right? We're not just telling people this feedback or sharing this hard stuff and then being like, okay, wiping our hands clean, we're done with it. Follow up. And it could be checking back in to make sure that the message was received, right? Following back up, asking if the other person has any follow up questions, checking in with how it landed, maybe reaffirming the relationship of like, hey, I really care about you. I care about, right? Even in the workplace setting or in personal relationships, it's the same thing. Saying, hi, I value you. I value the work that you're doing. I'm sharing this feedback from this, good place. Whatever words are relevant to the conversation that you've had with them, right? Reaffirming that and checking in to see if the message was received, see if there's any follow up conversation that needs to be had. Because when we follow up, it can help build trust. It can show self awareness and it can remind people that you care about them, you care about the relationship. It's not just about you being right. Okay. So hopefully this was helpful going through these 4 steps when we're thinking about how we can be more direct in our communication without being seen as difficult. So step number 1, getting clear on your intention. Step number 2, that you're regulating before you communicate. Step number 3, that you're using clear and compassionate language. And then step number 4, that you're following up and repairing if needed. Hopefully this was helpful. Takeaways, right? You can be direct and kind. You can be honest and respectful. You can be a strong leader and still be deeply compassionate. And so when you speak with intention, when you regulate before you communicate, when you can hold space for difficult conversations, you can change the culture and you can create long-lasting change in your organization or in your life. So let me know what resonated. Drop a comment, what was helpful for you, or what's one tip that you want to try in your next conversation. Thanks for being here. As always, if there are any other topics that you'd like me to share about, send a message, put it in the comments, and hope you have an amazing day.